Hello, my name is Jakob Katz. Let me just adjust the mic for a second. Today, I would like to share with you the result of my curiosity about a subject that has intrigued me and I've known very little about. That subject is the relationship between Jewish people and people of other religions. I decided to only examine the positive parts of these relationships because, let's face it, the negative relations are distressing and depressing. For my bar mitzvah, I wanted to explore the positive view on this subject. But first, let me tell you where all this started. I come from a family filled with a variety of beliefs. My dad was raised an Orthodox Jew in Montreal. They were so religious they had 3 sets of dishes. 1 for dairy, a 2nd for meat, and a 3rd set of paper plates for pepperoni pizza. He now calls himself a secular Jew. I would tell you what I call him, but I don't want to get in trouble. I have Canadian Jewish cousins, which is different than American Jewish cousins because they're really into hockey. I also have Catholic cousins. My mom is what I would call a Jewish hippie, which I think is very wizard. My grandmother Anne is unique, a blonde Portuguese Jew raised in Little Rock, Arkansas, and now faithfully attending the non-denominational Church of Religious Science. My dog Teddy believes God is any person holding a kosher hot dog. And my cat Kiki thinks God is that little red dot that magically appears every once in a while. So you understand why I might be curious about the positive sides of how different peoples get along. Oh yes, and there's me. I was born Jewish, and at first I loved being called Jakob X, which might make you wonder if I was a fan of Malcolm X. Well, that would be pretty odd for a 3-year-old. It had more to do with my love for the X-Men. When I got older, I went through a time I considered myself an atheist, and now I call myself an agnostic Jew. For me, being agnostic means not having a specific view on what or who God is, but being open-minded about it and accepting other people's beliefs and not getting hysterical about it. So today I'm going to share with you my curiosity, how I satisfied some of it, the people I spoke to, read about, and discussed. Now I warn you, for everyone who continuously goes on and on about his or her religion being better or someone else's religion being worse, I'm not going to get into any of that. I'm not going to try to solve anybody's religious issues. I'm going to try to approach all this as an optimist, that in this crazy world of conflicts and differences, there is always a positive side to it all. So how do I achieve what sometimes seems to be impossible? I think it starts with individuals, real human beings who reach across the great divides and choose not to fight, but to hold hands. I interviewed 2 secular Muslims from Persia, neighbors and friends of my father, Joseph and Mitra Jarahi. I spoke to Father Mark Martinez about an incredible human being, Pope John Paul II, who grew up among Jewish friends and neighbors and witnessed the Holocaust firsthand. I interviewed Dr. Sue Rubin from the Church of Religious Science. I looked at books, thought about my Shalom studies, and had discussions with my father, mother, brother, my Bible teacher, Herschel Hartman, and my Wegweiser, Lawrence Browdy. The issue of the relationship between Jews and Muslims would seem to be a difficult subject to cover, but I found wonderful stories about cooperation that were very special. For example, in Detroit last year, the area's Jewish community worked with local Muslim volunteers before and during the Christmas holiday to perform charity acts normally done by Christian organizations. This was so local Christians could prepare for the Christmas holiday and be at home with their families. The Detroit Rescue Mission served Christmas Eve dinners to 300 people with the help of the Jewish and Islamic volunteers. A problem did arise that directly affected all 3 communities. Christmas Day fell on a Saturday, and the religious Jews could not attend. So volunteers from the Muslim community promised to fill in for the Jews who could not participate. Here's another interesting story. In Northern Virginia on a Friday afternoon, people came into this synagogue, took off their shoes, unfurled rugs, and prayed in Arabic. Hours later, other people came in, wearing yarmulkes, lighting candles, and praying in Hebrew. How is that possible? It's because during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan, the synagogue has been doubling as a mosque. Synagogue members volunteered their building after hearing that the Muslim congregation was looking for a place to rent for overflow crowds. The local imam, Muhammad Magid, said people look to the Jewish-Muslim relationship as conflict. It's usually disputes between the two groups in the Middle East that make the news. Here's a story that shatters the stereotype. Imam Magid, who grew up in Sudan, said he did not meet someone who was Jewish until after he had moved to the U.S. in his 20s, and he never imagined having such a close relationship with a rabbi. But he said the relationship with the Northern Virginia Hebrew congregation has affected him and his members in a positive way. Beyond being tolerant, the synagogue and its members have been welcoming. He said one member of the mosque told him, "Next time I see a Jewish person, I will not look at them the same." Rabbi Robert Nosenchuk, who leads a Reform congregation of about 500 families, said the relationship works both ways. You really only get to know someone when you invite them into your home. And that brings me to my next story. When Joseph and Mitra Jarahi invited me into their home so we could talk about their experiences and relationships with the Jewish people. One of my concerns about interviewing the Jarahis was that my questions might come across as being racist or prejudiced on my part. I just want everyone to know they could not have been nicer to me. Joseph and Mitra grew up in Tehran before the 1979 revolution in Iran. They lived in separate but similar households. The families did not know each other, and neither family was very religious. They went to school with African, Armenian, Jewish, Muslim, and Christian children and played with them, made friends with them, and rarely thought about the differences between them. The only time there was separation was during the part of the day when there was religious training, such as studying the Quran, and then they all went their separate ways. Only when he finally moved to America did Joseph become aware of the conflict between the religions, and of who thought they were the dominant religion. Mitra, who grew up separately, had a very similar experience in the 17 years she lived in Iran. In many ways, I felt like Joseph and Mitra's upbringing was almost ideal. I feel that in communities, in life, we should focus more on who the person is inside, on their deeper qualities, rather than focusing on their physical features. Like when people might look at a black person on the street, some people just see this black person as not one individual among many, but as standing out of the crowd, just because they're black, just like the term the black sheep. People see this person as out of the ordinary. I believe you should see all people as being ordinary. I don't mean not talented, nor smart, nor having special things to offer, but that we are all one together. Joseph and Mitra grew up in a world in which, at least for them and their families, they saw, played, interacted, and went to school with Muslims, Christians, and Jews, and regarded their classmates as equals. If they had a neighbor who was Jewish wearing a kippah, they saw this person not as the Jewish person who lives next door, and dresses differently, but first and foremost, they saw this person as their neighbor. And I think that is great, and I respect that. One of the most interesting things they shared with me was that the most prejudice they ever dealt with was not after 9/11, but when American hostages were being held in Iran in 1979. When I asked them what they think when they hear someone say that Muslims are terrorists, Joseph answered, "I think they're ignorant, basing their thoughts on poor information they got somewhere, and it says more about that person than about me." One of the surprises that I got out of talking to Joseph was that he had more trouble with the concept of secularism. Joseph's definition of secular is living life freely without any contribution from religion in any way. Even though he considers himself to be leading a secular life, he wanted to make it very clear that he believes in the Creator, a term he seems to prefer over God or Allah. Mitra felt that all religions were the same, that they all wanted people to be good and do good things, and they wanted to encourage people to talk to God in their own specific way. But Mitra feels that people don't need a middleman. that people can talk to God through their heart. So even though my father thinks Joseph and Mitra as secular Muslims, Joseph sees Shalom as not purely an organization of secular Jews, but in some way religious Jews, and Joseph was very convincing. For Joseph sees true secularism as eliminating all traces of organized religion, not necessarily God. And because we at Shalom have bar mitzvahs and we celebrate our Jewish traditions and holidays, and investigate our roots, he therefore sees us as a kind of religion. Now that is not meant to be a criticism of Shalom, but just how Joseph sees us. And I think it's an interesting insight, and I agree with him. In fact, it would actually make my Zeta High, my Orthodox Jewish grandfather in Montreal, very happy to hear that Shalom is religious. When I look at the time I spent with Joseph and Mitra and tried to figure out what lesson I learned from them, it was that when you don't focus on religion, it's not a matter of religion. And what I mean by that is, don't look at people's religion to define the person. Look at the person, especially the person's behavior, how they live their life, not their religious beliefs, and then you will know who they really are.